Yeah, that you actually showed up. I'm very, very impressed, because if I was a younger version of myself on such a sunny June, I've most likely been drunk somewhere. So this just says more about you than me, that you have big ambitions in life, and that's great. So hopefully we can use it to something with a little bit of purpose the next 2 hours. So when we, as Crystal said, when we're having these events, we're actually asking ourselves, what would we really like to know about when we started our company, and what do we know that startups really want to know about? And it's clear that several ones of these sessions are about people, because I can ask basically any experienced entrepreneur or investor, and what's the most important thing in startups? And I can almost guarantee you that 99.9 are not saying it's a perfect business plan or it's a perfect whatever. They all come down to it's the people you attract and how you motivate them. That's basically what I hear from everyone, and it's the only thing when I look at. I'm an independent investor. I invest in early stage startups. And I know when I invest so early, there's no revenue, there's no product, whatever. So the only thing I can look at is these first 5 people, how cool are they? Have they shown the ability to attract talent? How are they working with that, etc., etc. So that's why we have this topic, because it sounds so easy, right? We just need to attract talent, but how do you do that? The only thing I can say is, as a startup, you can't attract people with money. I would say on average that the people I know in startups, when they look at the paycheck versus what they could get in a corporate, will be significantly lower. That can be 20, 30, 40, 50%. So for instance, if we hire a really qualified computer software scientist with a degree and 5 years of experience, I know that person could maybe be getting 70,000 or 65,000 a month in a corporate. What are we paying that person? Maybe 34, 35 or 40,000. So the big question is not that there is a need for talent. The big question is how are you actually attracting and motivating these people that are going to work for you with all the risk associated. Can you imagine actually work for a startup, you're getting a lower salary, a much higher risk of getting fired? Because sorry to say, most startups fail. Most of the startups that PreSeed invest in or I invest in, they actually fail. So you take a significant risk as an employee in early stage startups. Why you do that? That's basically the topic of today. So we have Mads, who would see it from the perspective of an investor. You know that Mads is in charge of talent at PreSeed. So a big part of their evaluation when they go into a new startup is what's the team like. So Mads will share some of his insights on what they are looking at, why, company culture, and how to motivate people. So that's sort of the investor angle. Then a big part of that is also financial incentives. Not in terms of fixed salary, but ownership. So I guess all startups I know of, at least all of them I'm involved in, we share ownership. In other words, we give shares or right for shares to employees. And that also sounds so extremely easy, but it's not. It's not only tax, but it's a lot of things. So we actually asked Mattias, who is a specialist in this area, to talk 30 minutes about how to avoid the most common mistakes when giving share ownership to employees. And finally, we have Christian from Templafy, who will sort of tie it together from a startup perspective. So how have they, in the different phases of Templafy, worked with both the culture, but also the financial incentives for their employees. So with that brief introduction, I would actually talk about not what you should do, because all the rest are doing it, what you shouldn't do. So instead of giving sort of introduction, I said to myself, what could I share in 10 minutes? And I actually decided to share what I believe is the 10 or 6 biggest mistakes I see. And I can promise I've done it all several times. And I've decided to take some from the, you can say, the culture and hiring perspective, and some from the more specific on the wants. My point with this is when we talk about how to incentivize people, we actually talk about very different things. we talk about how to incentivize people in a very late startup like Templafy, which hundreds, I don't know how many employees do you have, Christian? Plus 100? Yeah, so plus 100 employees. That's one thing, that's one challenge. It's typically around how much warrants you give to them, salaries getting closer to market-based because it's a big company that raised a lot of money, versus the really, really early stage where it's typically, are you a co-founder or early employee, you get a lot of warrants, but again, you have basically no salary. And then in the middle, in some of the startups I'm in, that got some kind of traction, we can actually pay you a salary, but a big part of the incentives is also the shares we can offer. So my point is, when we talk about how to incentivize talent, it's a big difference between how to find a co-founder versus a late-stage employee. And very simplified, I see like 3-4 different types of key issues we're having. In the beginning, when you sit and you have no office and you actually work from Espresso House, it's typically about how do I find this co-founder, Nicolaj? And how can I find a person that are willing to work for basically no salary? So that's typically, yeah, we give a lot of warrants to the person and find out if we can get a way of giving that person salary for the next 12 months. On the other hand, you have companies like Trustpilot, it could be Templafy, where we say, you know, how do we ensure this startup culture, startup mentality, when people are getting, I'll not say normal employees, but closer to normal employees. Because here, honestly, if you are a new employee at Templafy, you're getting 0.whatever%, right? Because you are employee number 100. The good thing is then we can give you a high salary, but it's a very different challenge here from here. And then in the middle, we have companies like one of them, I'm a co-founder of Peneo, where we maybe have these 40 employees, where we sort of building up a different kind of startup. Because now we not only have an office in Copenhagen, we also have one in Sweden and Norway. How do we keep that company culture? How do we sort of starting to recruiting normal people? Because the people that join the startup here, sorry to say, we are not normal, right? We are. How many of you are like co-founder in a startup, right? You know, sorry to say, you're not normal, right? Because it doesn't make sense what we do. It doesn't. You know, no one should do it from a financial point of view, so why are we doing it? For all kind of other reasons. But the person that joined this one is very different from the person that joined this one. So what are the 6 biggest mistakes I think I've seen and I do, and companies in my portfolio doing is, the first thing is not taking recruiting seriously. We all talk about teams or whatever, but at some point in time we have to hire these 5 salespeople or 2 software engineers, whatever. It's very time consuming. And one of the mistakes I've done in the past was that I thought that, hey, we're just doing recruiting the normal way, meaning put in ads or use a headhunter to do the hard work for us. I honestly believe that being an executive, especially in the early days, where you don't have any head of people or head of talent, you need to do that yourself. So I would expect that an early stage CEO is spending a significant part of his or her time doing that. And if that person is not doing that, I know that that person will not be getting quality of a high caliber. So for instance, in one of my startups right now, we are hiring a CFO. And you can say I'm only an investor with 10% of the equity. But I do spend a lot of time on that, and I expect the CEO of the company to spend a lot of time on that. Why? Because it's extremely important. We can't hire that CEO based on a job ad, because we're going to sell a vision to that person, say, dear CFO, I know you could be getting 80,000 a month in that company. Why don't you come and work for our company for 40,000? We know we might be bankrupt next year, but doesn't it sound fun? But honestly, that's how it is. So we have to realize that this about talent is key will also mean that we're spending a significant part of our time on that. So I'm the one of the person, when I took my master's degree, I just hated HR. Because HR, and when I work in corporate, I hated HR because HR is about move-samtale and all that kind of shit, right? But working in startup made me realize that that's the only way I can generate value, that is to spend time on that. I think the second mistakes I've done, and I see again and again, is that since we are entrepreneurs ourselves, we're taking this crazy decision to become a co-founder of a startup, we think that the rest of the world are doing the same. But there is actually 99% of the people who are not thinking like us. So this is a classic marshmallow test. Have you ever heard about the marshmallow test? You know, which you give to your kid. So when your kid is 3 years old or something like that, it's a famous Stanford experiment. You put one marshmallow in front of your kid and saying, hey, if you wait 15 minutes eating it, you get 2, right? And you follow these kids and find out that the one who can wait 15 minutes before they eat it actually are successful in life. You know, startups is a lot about don't eating that marshmallow, don't take the high salary now because we are wait for something in the long run. So we think it's great to work for a low salary for a number of years because there is this lottery ticket out there. But there is actually a big majority of the population who are not thinking like us. So the mistake I see and I've done in the past is when hiring people, I think this 2% equity is really what drives that person. Because that's how I think. I think, oh my God, you can get this upside, and if you just wait here for the next 7 years, and despite there's 80% chance that the company go bankrupt, you might be rich. But guess what? A big part of these employees are not thinking like that. That has taken me a lot of time to basically understand that people are driven by very different things. Some people might want to have a bigger paycheck, or maybe an exit bonus, or maybe an annual bonus, or quarter bonus, or maybe just an extra week of holiday. Maybe that person don't want this 2%. So if that 2% equity don't incentivize that type of person, why give it away? The third one is, and that's maybe a little bit fluffy, but how many of you are below, let's say, 25? So when I teach at CBS, and CBS should be the cornerstone of capitalism, right? And when I see business plans from CBS, from my students, it's all about impact. It's really all about how we can make the world better, which is fantastic in many ways. And the reason why I highlight it's at CBS is because we're not talking about RUC, right? We're talking about CBS. And that just means that at least one of my key points is that it's really hard to motivate the younger generation to have a normal job like our parents had, or maybe we had. Because honestly, many of the younger generation are motivated by a completely different mindset. But the positive thing is if you can show something that gives meaning for them, like this, then I think you can motivate it. Now I'm generalizing, it's not everyone below 25, but I just see this great gender gap. And if I should say some of the organizations which I think will be the biggest ones in trouble, I think something like the accounting firms or McKinsey or whatever, who has been used to taking these young poor people and squeeze every life out of them for 5 years, because there's this sort of carrot over here that you might become a partner in 20 years, right? I'm curious to see if that model works. One of the mistakes I've done, at least, is not realizing how you can utilize this. For instance, now I'm a board member in a biotech company where we're about to try to cure cancer. And that itself, that we can try to cure cancer, will mean that the amount of talent I can get is just much higher than in a regular company because people are motivated by that. I also try to include 3 fuck-ups, on the warn part. And we as entrepreneurs, we are cheap. We don't want to spend money on expensive consultants or lawyers. And I fully support that. But just have in mind that you can't, if you haven't done it before, you can't do a warn program for an employee, period. You can try to find some kind online and fill it out, but you will be in breach with every single law I know of. There will be tax implication, there will be a lot of things. So I've tried in the past to avoid spending these 10, 15,000 kroner, 20,000 kroner on a warn program, but I just have to say it's the most expensive savings I've ever done. So I should be given a commission agreement from lawyers because I really think you need to do it. It's just like, no way around it. And then we all think that our startup is going to be successful next year, right? Next year we will have 10 times revenue like this year, so we can't really foresee how long time it will take before a startup is really big. And many entrepreneurs and investors, we basically multiply any projection we see by 3. So if you say that you will have 10 million revenue next year, I believe it will take 3 or 4 years, because things take time. So that means that if you're giving out a lot of equity warrant programs to employees, and then they are all vested, Mattias will talk much more about that, in 1 year, so they can all leave in 1 year. Then what? Then maybe a big part of your employees are saying, why should I work for this lower salary? Couldn't I just get a well-paid job? I still keep my shares. So remember, warrants for employees should be vested over a long time. I don't know what that could be. I would recommend something like plus 4 years, at least. And the same goes for co-founders, because if you are 4 or 5 people that created a company, the chance that you're all working for that company in 5 years is close to 0. Because one is kicked out because we don't like his qualifications anymore, one wants to go to Bali for surfing, one wants to go back to corporate, etc., etc. And I see a number of startups that are close to chaos because 1 or 2 co-founders leave. So the other co-founders have to work for all of them. And it creates so much trouble in the organization. You need some kind of rights when people are leaving early. And then what early is different, of course. Of course, if people have worked for the company for 10 years, shouldn't they be allowed to leave? Maybe, I think so. What if the person have worked for 6 months and leaving? Should the person be allowed to keep all his shares? Most likely not. Again, something you talk with the lawyer about. So have in mind, you need to bring in a lawyer, and you need to think carefully about who you give shares, because it's not everyone that is motivated by equity. And with these words, I will actually give the word to Mads from PreSeed.